What's up, Legend? Welcome back to my Unmatched Strategy Guide series. Today we are unpacking the ugliest character from Battle of Legends Volume 1, Medusa. As always, before we dive in, I will recommend going back to watch at least Volumes 1 and 2 of this series, because the strategies I give for certain cards or effects or whatnot kind of build on each other, and I already talked about a bunch of basic foundational knowledge in the first 2 episodes of this series, so you should probably go back and watch those first. And this is probably the last time I'll say this, because let's face it, if you jump into this series from episode 7 onwards, you deserve to be left in the dark about some things. Let's go. As always, we'll start with the stats first. Medusa is a ranged character. That's new. She has 16 health, move 3, and she has 3 1-health Harpies that are all melee fighters. So right away, movement 3 is obviously a lot better than movement 2. And because there's only a handful of fellow Movement 3 characters in this entire game universe, you will be at a movement advantage for most of your matchups. Medusa is also the first ranged hero we're going to talk about, so when I mention her attacks, keep in mind that you don't have to be right next to your opponent in order to use them. The combination of being both ranged and move 3 is actually just insane. The only other hero in all of Unmatched to have that combination is Muldoon. And obviously, if you're faster than your opponent, and you can hit them when they can't hit you back, that's going to lead to some pretty good positional situations for you. 16 health total for Medusa is above average for a single hero. The average is about 15 and a little bit of change. But your sidekicks, even though you have 3, all only have 1 health. So your total health pool is 19, which is below average, but not really, because the enemy can just ignore your Harpies, so you actually really only have 16 health, or they can actually try to kill them, but you can revive 2, which I'll get to later, so that is really 5 health, so your total is 21, which is actually above average. So it all depends on kind of how your opponent plays against you having multiple sidekicks. So you should try to make them kill your Harpies so that your health pool is artificially higher, or punish them for not doing so. And because you have multiple sidekicks, the play style for you is probably going to be a little bit different than heroes without sidekicks or with only 1 sidekick, and we'll talk about that later. Your deck composition, I'm just going to briefly mention. You only have 11 unique cards. We talked about how deck composition affects the deck consistency in the Alice video, and why Alice is kind of at a disadvantage because her deck is so inconsistent. She has 15 unique cards, King Arthur has 16 unique cards, and Sinbad has 10 unique cards. However, for Sinbad, I'm counting all of his voyages as 1 unique card because they all have basically the same effect. But because there are 7 different after combat effects on Sinbad's voyages, your deck, even though you have 1 more unique card, technically, by my definition, your deck is actually probably the most consistent out of all of the Battle of Legends Volume 1 characters. If we switch gears to talk about Medusa's ability, it says, at the start of your turn, you may deal 1 damage to 1 opposing fighter in Medusa's zone. This ability is good against some heroes, and some heroes it just does nothing. Heroes like Bruce Lee and Robin Hood, which have movement effects as their ability, can just ignore this because they'll just never let you use it. And some heroes who just don't have a lot of mobility in their deck will get absolutely wrecked by this. So it really punishes low mobility characters, characters with 1 health sidekicks, because this ability would just instantly kill them, and kiting with disadvantage. And for those of you who haven't heard me use that phrase before, that's when your 2 actions on your turn are maneuver, then attack, because that leaves you in a pretty vulnerable position if you're either in the same zone as the other person, or you're right next to them if you're a melee character. So it's usually much better to attack and then move. So when characters are maneuvering and then attacking you, you can use this ability much more often than the other way around. This leads to a more defensive play style, as you're kind of running away and waiting for the enemy to come to you and then hit you so that you can use this ability on them. And it makes you care about your positioning as well as what zone you're in a little bit more, although you already care about what zone you're in because you're a ranged character. Melee characters don't really care about that. So you have to pay attention so that you're like in the middle of a zone instead of on the edge of a zone, because if a melee fighter hits you and you're on the edge of a zone and they're technically standing in another zone but the spaces are adjacent, you actually won't be able to use this ability. So just keep that in mind. Like I said before, it relies on your opponent for you to use, because they have to make themselves vulnerable to this attack. They have to end their turn in the same zone as you. So obviously they can just choose not to and then deny you the chance to do this. And this happens at the start of your turn only, so don't forget to use it. I love playing against Medusas that don't remember that this only happens at the start of your turn, so just don't forget to use this ability. Otherwise, your opponent will be secretly laughing at you. Let's take a look at her cards now. The first card we're going to talk about is Gaze of Stone. It is a 2-value Medusa attack. You have 3 copies of it, and it has a boost value of 4, and it says, after combat, if you won the combat, deal 8 damage to the opposing fighter.
Oh, that's a lot of damage!
This is quite possibly the scariest attack in the game. It can deal 10 damage just from one card. And unlike Forever Hide, which requires you to discard cards for the attack to deal more damage, the damage from this card is all self-contained within its single card. Which means, theoretically, every single attack, well, I mean, she only has 3 copies of this, but potentially every attack Medusa plays could be this card, which now makes it so that if you're playing against Medusa, you have to block everything. You can't just say, oh yeah, I'll just take the damage this time, because it could be the Gaze of Stone and you could take 10, which is over half your health probably. This card is just insane. The one caveat is it's not actually that good. It says if you win the combat. And remember, if you tie, the defender wins the combat. So the only way for this effect to go off is if your opponent plays a block card that has a value of 1, such as a regroup, or doesn't block at all. And as I just said, when you're playing against Medusa, you have to block. Your opponent's basically going to be blocking every single attack of yours. And unless they are some kind of dumb, they won't block with regroup, because A, like I mentioned in my basic cards video, blocking with regroup normally is pretty bad, and B, if they know you have this card, they can't block with regroup. So they're going to be blocking all of your attacks with something that's at least 2. Which means if you're playing against someone that's smart, has a basic level of understanding of your deck, or is just lucky enough to not draw a hand of only regroups to block with, you'll never get this effect off. So therefore, this card isn't actually that useful as an attack, because you won't win combats that often with a printed value of 2. However, the threat of this card is the whole motivation behind your deck, because now the whole game for you is trying to bait this attack and get your opponents to waste all their good block cards early, so maybe you can get this off later in the game. However, another thing to note about this card, it has a boost value of 4. That matters a lot because of this next card, Second Shot, which is a Medusa only attack with a printed value of 3. You have 3 copies and the boost value is 3. It's a lot of 3s. And it says, during combat, you may boost this attack. This is actually the best attack card in your deck, because you have 5 cards in your deck that have a boost value of 4, including the 3 Gazes of Stones. So pretty regularly when you use this attack, you'll be dealing 7 damage if they do not cancel the effect with a feint, which still doesn't really feel that bad because the printed value of this card is 3. There are similar cards, like I think Muldoon also has a Second Shot in his deck, and King Arthur has basically this effect, but it's on a card called Noble Sacrifice. And in King Arthur's deck, it's a printed value of 2. So having this card with a printed value of 3 is a lot better, because even though it's pretty vulnerable to feint, it kind of just wrecks the whole point of this card. You'll still be dealing at least 1 damage, which doesn't feel as bad as dealing 0 damage. But anyway, you also have a handful of boost 3s, so you could use this if you don't have the right cards in your hand to deal 6 damage, but dealing 7 damage is a lot better, obviously. And you have 3 copies of it, so you're going to be putting the hurt on your opponent. it doesn't really feel that bad to use a card for a few reasons. One, because you have a lot of discard effects in your deck, so you'll often have more cards in your hand than your opponent. So using 2 cards for 1 attack is fine. And also, it doesn't really... You're not really sweating the fact that you're using a Gaze of Stone as a boost card, because even though now your opponent knows that you have 1 less copy of that card, you're still dealing a lot of damage for a single attack. Most block cards in this game are usually either 3 or 4. Willow has one that's 5, but you'll regularly be dealing 3 to 4 damage with this attack. And if you get this off 3 times, that's 9 to 12 damage. Most characters have around 15 health. Your ability will probably deal anywhere from 1 to 4 damage during a game. So all you really have to do is land this attack with a boost 4 boost card 2 or 3 times and just find a bunch of little points of damage elsewhere, which you are very suited to do. So this is why this card is better than Gaze of Stone in this deck. The next card we're going to talk about is Hiss and Slither. It is a Medusa only defense card with a printed value of 4. You have 3 copies of it, and the boost value is 3. And it says, after combat, your opponent discards 1 card. So as I just mentioned, most block cards in this game are 3 to 4 in value. Having 4 obviously is the better end of that, and this is like the very high end of blue cards. 4 is an excellent value for this card, and the fact that it has an effect like this printed on it is nasty. Discarding a card always just feels bad because it's less things for you to do. The fact that your opponent gets to choose which card to discard isn't that great, because obviously if they have a regroup in their hand or like a sidekick card that they can't use because their sidekick's dead, they're just going to toss that away. So you're not really gaining that much out of the actual discard effect, but it does give you card advantage. Having more cards than your opponent is always good. And the fact that this is on a defense card is a lot better than having it on an offense card, because when you're playing this card, you're blocking an attack from your opponent. So it's their turn. They then have to discard a card. And if that was the last action, it'll be your turn now. Or they'll have 1 more action. And maybe they'll maneuver away. But they have less time to react to the fact that they discarded a card because it's happening on their turn. Which means hopefully on your turn, you'll have a slight advantage because now they're 1 less card than they thought they would have. And in some situations, they'll actually have to discard a crucial card from their hand. So that's why having this effect on a defense card is a lot better than on an offense card. And the effect is generally just punishing in general. It feels really bad to attack your opponent and then, you have to like pay a little bit extra in order to actually attack them. You have to discard a card afterwards. And this is a really high block value, so you might not even deal that much damage to them. So overall, this is just another card that adds to kind of like the annoying factor of Medusa. This is a really good defense card. And considering how you don't actually have that many defensive options as Medusa in this deck, this is a very, very good card. We're going to talk about Medusa's schemes now. The first scheme is called a Momentary Glance. You have 2 copies of this card. It has the boost value of 4. So this card and Gaze of Stone are the 2 4-value boost cards in your deck. And it says, deal 2 damage to any 1 fighter in Medusa's zone. So this is a direct damage card because you basically play this scheme as one of your actions and you deal 2 damage to another fighter, and there's nothing they can do about it. They don't have a chance to block because it's not an attack. Direct damage is great because it surprises your opponent. It's pretty unpredictable, and they can't do anything about it. But I would consider this card an investment. You can either use it and deal 2 damage now, or you can wait until you have a second shot, and then you can use this card to boost the second shot to deal 7 damage. And honestly, I would almost rather save it because you're dealing 4 damage instead of 2. Although that really isn't how the math always works out. I would say don't stick to one strategy. be very flexible with this card because it presents you with two options. And based on the specific situation that you're in, which there's so many different scenarios of how the game could play out, I would say make a judgment call when you have this in your hand and try to just use it the best you can in that specific game. I would say it's better to use this card on sidekicks than it is for heroes because you don't want to waste big attacks like Gaze of Stone or Second Shot on sidekicks that only have 6 to 8 health. You'd rather maybe deal like 2 to 4 damage through other means and then use this card to finish them off. But it's up to you how you want to use this. I would rather use this at least once as a boost card over Gaze of Stone, because if you can actually get that attack off, you'll deal so much more damage from that. But this card does have a nice use as a guaranteed 2 damage. The next card is Winged Frenzy. This is in any scheme, so you could technically use this as a Harpy, but the way that it's worded, it basically should just be a Medusa scheme. And it says, move each of your fighters up to 3 spaces. You may move them through spaces containing opposing fighters, then return a defeated Harpy, if any, to any space in Medusa's zone. You have 2 copies of this, and the boost value is 2. It says, if any, after defeated Harpy, but you should really only use this after a Harpy has been defeated. And I would not really hang on to this card. As soon as a Harpy is defeated, I would probably, if I had this in my hand, play it the next turn, just because having 3 Harpies out is just really annoying for your opponent. And the fact that you have 2 copies of this, you can revive 2 Harpies, so a grand total of 5 Harpies, although not concurrently. It's just really annoying for your opponent to have to deal with. They spend a turn or an action or an attack or whatever trying to get rid of one of the Harpies, and you just play this card the next turn, instantly revive it back. That's really annoying. The fact that it has the movement effect attached to it is also very nice because you can use this as like a surprise gotcha to set up an attack against your opponent. The fact that it moves all of your fighters up to 3 spaces is good, even though you have a base movement of 3 anyway, so it's not like super great. The fact that you can move your fighters through spaces containing opposing fighters just adds to the surprise element of this card. Overall, this is a pretty good card. We're going to talk about the Harpies now. As I've mentioned before, Medusa kind of has a defensive play style. So I would use these Harpies to defend Medusa. Obviously, against some heroes like Bigfoot, you want to use your sidekicks to neglect his ability. But for general matchups, I would say you want to create a wall of uglies, as these people are all hideous, around Medusa and just make it even more challenging for your opponent to try to kill her. Besides Hiss and Slither, Medusa does not have a lot of great block cards. So if you can block with the Harpies instead, that will relieve some of the pressure off of Medusa's health total. The positioning matters for these people, probably a little bit more than a single sidekick would, because some heroes, not really in Battle of Legends Volume 1, but some heroes have area of effect attacks that can deal a certain amount of damage to every fighter that's next to them. So obviously, if you clump all your Harpies up and let someone like Buffy or Dracula walk in and hit all 3 of them with a card, that's going to feel pretty bad. So matchup depending, you may want to restructure your wall. But in Battle of Legends Volume 1, at least, besides Restless Spirits, the Merlin scheme, there really isn't that much AoE to worry about. So you can just shift them around based on where your opponent is. Let's talk about their cards now. The first card is Clutching Claws. It is a Harpy-only 3-value versatile attack. You have 3 copies of it, and the boost value is 2. And it says, after combat, your opponent discards a card. So just like we talked about for Hiss and Slither, discarding a card, or your opponent discarding a card, I should say, is very good when you play this as a defense card, because then they have less time to react to the fact that they're down a card, and it's probably your turn. However, because the value is only 3, you probably will lose the Harpy if you block with this card, because most attacks are usually around 4, although sometimes they're 3. It depends on your opponent's deck. Like Bruce Lee, he only has 3 value attacks mostly, so this is actually a pretty good block card against him, but that's very matchup dependent, so I won't really get into more examples like that. Overall, this is a fine card. The fact that the discard effect is on a value 3 card makes it feel not broken, so it's just a pretty good card in this deck. The other Harpy card we're going to talk about is the Hounds of the Mighty Zeus. It is a Harpy only, 4 value versatile card. You have 2 copies of it, and the boost value is 3. And it says after combat, move each Harpy up to 3 spaces. So if you use this on offense as an attack, 4 value attacks are pretty good. And it's kind of like a super skirmish that's guaranteed because you get to move all your Harpies whether or not you won the combat, and you get to move them 3 spaces instead of 2. That's a pretty good effect. It's kind of like resetting the kiting attack because you can move a Harpy, attack with this card, and then move them away so that you're not right next to your opponent again, because Harpies are melee fighters, not ranged. Medusa is ranged, but her sidekicks are not. But I would rather use this defensively, as for the reasons we talked about with Clutching Claws. You want to block with your Harpies because Medusa's block cards aren't really that good. This is a 4 value block card, so that's even better. The Harpy will probably survive if you use this card to block. And this is a better defensive card than Clutching Claws, at least from a value standpoint, because you'll get to keep the Harpy alive for longer, and maintaining the wall of uglies, as I call them, just makes it harder for your opponent to kill Medusa. We're going to talk about the 2 any cards now. They're pretty similar, so I'm just going to put them both on the screen. The first one is Dash. It is an any 3 value versatile card. You have 3 copies of it. The boost value is 1. And it says after combat, move your fighter up to 3 spaces. It's another guaranteed skirmish effect card, but a little worse because the value is 3 instead of 4. I would use this as an attack of these 2 cards because as Medusa, you want to attack as Medusa more than you want to attack as the Harpies, because Gaze of Stone or Second Shot can't come from a Harpy, so your opponent is less inclined to use a good block card on them, even though the Harpies have a 4 value potential attack. You want to attack with Medusa as much as possible to make your opponent waste resources fretting over what big attack you're going to play. So if you play Dash as an attack, they might think you're playing Second Shot and waste a feint on it. So you want to give your opponent as many opportunities as possible to waste their good cards, which is why I think using this card as an attack for Medusa is fine. And the skirmish effect is good too. It's probably a little bit better for the Harpies because they're melee fighters. Moving Medusa after combat doesn't matter as much because most of the time you won't be right next to your opponent, but situationally that could be very good for repositioning after a fight. Snipe is very similar to Dash. It's an any 3 value versatile card. You have 3 copies of it and the boost value is 1, but it says after combat, draw a card. So this is the only card draw in your deck besides Regroup, which I thought Alice had low card draw. Medusa only has this and Regroup, which is actually a lot worse. I think from a observational perspective, it's fine that Medusa doesn't have a lot of card draw because she makes her opponents discard a lot of cards. So oftentimes she'll just have card advantage anyways by the sheer amount of cards your opponent has to shed when you bother them with discard effects. So not being able to draw a lot of cards is fine from a balance perspective. I think this is a good block card for Medusa because you get to replace the card after you block with this card. And even though the value's 3, that's not super great. It's fine because after you use all 3 of your Hiss and Slithers, it's kind of this and Dash, or otherwise you're blocking with regroups and feints. And feints, yeah, they're fine to block with, but they're a little bit more situational when you think your opponent is going to play a powerful attack with an effect on it. So it's really this card, Snipe, Dash, and Hiss and Slither as your good block cards for Medusa. but I would prefer Dash on offense and Snipe on defense, but they're both very flexible, and they're the best non-feint, non-hiss and slither block cards for Medusa. So keep that in mind. And lastly, we'll talk about the basic cards in the deck. As always, you have 3 copies of both Feint and Regroup, but there are no momentous shifts and no skirmishes in this deck, which is fine. Feint works the same in this deck as it does in every other deck. You play it as a block card when you think your opponent is going to smack you with a powerful effect. But Regroup has even better use in this deck because normally you just use it as a bait card on offense and you're fine with that. But Medusa uses this as bait so much better because of her cards like Second Shot and Gaze of Stone. There's so much potential to do damage from an attack that your opponent has to respect every single one of yours. So when you play Regroup as an attack, it feels even better when your opponent wastes a really good card trying to stop you from doing something nasty to them. So Regroup is still a bait card, but it just feels so much better when you do it as Medusa. So it's time for my final thoughts now about Medusa. Ooh, I got chills from thinking about baiting Regroup with Medusa. It's just so mean. So anyway, final thoughts. Discarding cards is annoying. Getting pinged 1 health at the start of your turn because you can't really move after combat is annoying. Your opponent having more range and movement than you is annoying. So overall, Medusa is just the perfect, like, I don't want to say troll character, but she just feels so bad to play against because she's just so nasty and so much better than you at almost every aspect of the game. However, I will say it's fine because she's not annoying in the sense that her deck construction and her cards are overpowered in much the way that Bigfoot is annoying because his deck is just broken. Medusa's deck feels balanced. It's the abilities and the accessories of her deck that make it bothersome to fight her. And this is good because the more skill you have, the more you'll actually be able to use these in conjunction with her deck to make her very, very powerful. But a low skill player will not be able to capitalize on this. And that's why I think her character design, even though it's oppressive in some senses, it's much more balanced than Bigfoot is. The playstyle she presents is perfect for people like my brother, who, when we play together, he kind of knows that I'm a better board game player than him, and I'm probably better at this game than him. So he will pick Medusa a lot because she provides chances for him to just bother me. And so when I, as the better player, am playing against Medusa, it's frustrating, but I'm fine with it because it's designed to present a challenge to me. And that's why it's still fun to play against her. She has advantages in her consistency, health, high potential damage, and movement that make her a formidable foe. And she is certainly one of the best heroes in all of Unmatched. But she's still fun to play against because of the mind games and the trickery with her attacking. So overall, she's just a fun character. She's fun to play as because it's fun to just schlonk your opponent down with discard effects and stuff like that. And it's fun to play against because every single attack has so much weight to it. Every moment feels intense. And this game is all about creating fun and intense moments. And that's exactly what this character achieves. So thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for a video specifically about Battle of Legends Volume 1, probably in the next week. I'm working on it right now, but I'm still not sure like what exactly it looks like. I'm probably going to do some matchup analysis, talk about the maps a little bit, and just give like a conclusion summary type thing for the Battle of Legends Volume 1 set. I plan on doing a video like this after every set I cover, but I'm still trying to figure out, like I said, how it looks like. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for what I should include in a video like that, leave a comment down below. Let me know. Like, subscribe, and yeet. Have a good one.